One week before the world ended for her, a 75-year-old grandmother was reading bedtime stories to her two grandkids. The next time anyone saw her, she was a towering monster in an army out to conquer California, and she couldn't remember their faces. The whole species comes from a great tragedy. Not one of them was ever born, and none will ever be. They get made out of people, in a vat, in a terrifying process that is irreversible with disastrous consequences, and that exactly one mutant ever made it back from. So what actually happened to every mutant in Fallout? Strong. Strong is the one most people know, but he's also the single worst possible representation for his own species, which is exactly why he's the right place to start. You find him locked in a cage at the top of Trinity Tower in Fallout 4, a prisoner of other super mutants, which should already tell you something about how these things treat each other. He's up there with a human hostage, a Shakespearean actor named Rex Goodman, because the mutant running the tower thought a captive theater performer would make good entertainment. That's where Strong picked up his obsession, from listening to a terrified man recite plays in the next cage over. Let him out and he'll follow you around the Commonwealth, being enormous, being loud, and being very confidently wrong about almost everything. He's obsessed with a book he half heard about called Macbeth, and he's convinced it contains a real substance called the milk of human kindness, which he believes will make humans stronger if he can just find some and drink it. That's the joke, and it's a good one. But listen to what he's actually saying underneath it, because the joke has a floor, and the floor is grim. Strong doesn't want to be human. He wants to understand what makes humans hard to kill. He watched a species that should have died in the fire keep getting back up, and he decided there must be a substance responsible, because the alternative is that people are simply stubborn. And that's not an answer a super mutant can punch. He genuinely likes being a super mutant, he says so repeatedly, and he gets angry at the idea of anybody trying to reverse it. He approves when you're violent and complains when you're kind, and he has no interest whatsoever in a cure. He'll grumble at you for picking locks instead of smashing doors, and he thinks talking your way out of a fight is the saddest thing he's ever watched a human do. He is, in fairness, extremely consistent about it. And the strangest thing about traveling with him is how quickly you stop noticing that your friend is a walking war crime with opinions about literature. Hold on to that, because it comes back later in a way that I honestly didn't expect it to. He's about 8 feet of muscle, effectively immune to radiation, hard to kill with anything short of a rocket, and stupid in a specific way that isn't quite the same as being an animal. His body doesn't age. The mutated cells in a super mutant replicate faster than they die off, which means these things simply don't get old, and they'll keep going until something kills them. That's a 200-year-old man in there, in every sense that matters. That's the first thing that gets lost when people write these creatures off as monsters, the sheer amount of time involved. Strong has been alive longer than any human in the Commonwealth. He's outlived everyone who ever knew his real name, and he'll still be standing there long after you're gone, and he didn't choose any of this. Somewhere in the Commonwealth, there was a person who got grabbed, dragged underground, and put into a machine, and Strong is what walked back out. He doesn't remember any of it, and almost none of them do. The FEV scrubs most of what came before, which is a mercy of a kind, right up until you meet the handful who kept their memories and realize what it costs to remember being someone else, which raises the question that runs under this entire video, the one I want you to hold from here on. If they can't reproduce, and every one of them was made in a lab, then who's been making them for 200 years? And why has nobody been able to stop it? What the vats do? Making a super mutant takes about 10 minutes, and it doesn't really require anyone's permission. The whole thing runs on a substance called the forced evolutionary virus, and it was never meant to make monsters at all. Before the war, a company called West Tech was working on FEV for the US military, trying to build a soldier who could survive biological weapons and shrug off wounds that would kill anyone else. That was the whole pitch. A soldier who was stronger and tougher and harder to break. West Tech ran the research out of a facility in California, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because they're the same company that gave America power armor, which tells you exactly how the pre-war military spent its money. And the horrible part is that it works. Dunk a human being into a vat of the stuff, and they come out taller, thicker, immune to disease, resistant to radiation, and strong enough to swing a car door as a weapon. The problem is everything else it takes on the way there. FEV rewrites your DNA, and once it's in you, it keeps correcting your genetics back toward its own version of you, which is why the mutation is basically permanent. Any cure would have to do two impossible things at once: put your original DNA back and stop the virus from immediately overwriting it again. Before the war, scientists knew a cure was theoretically possible and considered it unachievable in practice because you'd need a preserved sample of exactly who the person used to be, and the virus destroys that on the way in. So the cure requires a copy of a thing the disease exists to delete. Nobody in the entire franchise has ever managed both. Well, almost nobody, but we'll get to them. Super mutants aren't even the only thing the virus makes either. Centaurs, those things that look like several people melted together and given a whip for a tongue, are FEV as well, just applied to a mix of bodies at once. Whatever you think a super mutant is, the virus has a worse version of it filed away somewhere. Floaters came out of the same program, and so did a a fair chunk of the wildlife people assume was just radiation doing its thing. The bigger issue is what it does to your head, and this is the detail that unlocks the whole timeline. How smart your super mutant turns out depends on how clean your genes were when you went in. Take a healthy pre-war human out of a sealed vault, dip them, and you get a mutant who can talk, plan, hold a conversation, and run a town. Take a wastelander whose DNA has been quietly cooked by 2 centuries of background radiation, dip them, and you get a 9-foot toddler with a nail board. That's why the mutants in the older games are eloquent, and the ones stomping around the Commonwealth are yelling about milk. People call that a writing inconsistency, but it's actually a symptom of the world getting more poisoned. The wasteland got more irradiated, so the raw material got worse, so the monsters got dumber. There's a grim little irony buried in that. The healthiest, best protected people in the wasteland, the ones tucked safely inside vaults, made the most dangerous mutants of all, because they were the only ones with genes clean enough to keep their intelligence on the way through. And that's the part that should worry you, because the recipe never stopped working. It only ever needed a vat, a supply of people, and somebody willing to use both. 200 years later, all 3 of those things are still in plentiful supply, which is the actual reason the wasteland is crawling with these creatures. The first person to figure that out had been human once too, and he built an army out of it. The Master. The Master is the reason super mutants exist, and he wasn't trying to conquer anybody. He thought he was saving the human race. His name was Richard Gray. He was a scientist who went poking around a place called Mariposa Military Base, which is where the army had been quietly continuing the FEV program, and he fell into a vat. That's the whole origin of Fallout's first great villain. He tripped into a vat. Well, that's the polite version. He was pushed into it, in some tellings, by a companion who panicked, which somehow makes it worse. What crawled back out was something past a super mutant, if that makes sense. And Gray didn't set out to be either a monster or a messiah. His own recordings are just a man slowly talking himself into it, reasoning from "this is horrifying" to "this is the answer one entry at a time," until the thing in the cathedral fully believed it was right. The vat kept working on him, and Gray kept growing, absorbing the flesh and the machinery around him until he stopped being a shape a person could recognize. By the time you meet him in the first game, he's a heaving mass of mutated tissue fused into a computer terminal, wired into the floor of a cathedral, speaking in 3 voices at once because there's more than one mind in there now. That part isn't a metaphor. He absorbed other people on the way up, and their minds are still in there with his, which is why he answers in a chorus and sometimes argues with himself mid-sentence. He's also psychic. Get close enough and he pushes on your thoughts directly, trying to make you want the unity, because in his head conversion was never an attack. It was a kindness you would thank him for later. And what he wants is peace. He builds a religion to help him get it too. The Children of the Cathedral are a church, a genuinely popular one, with clinics and preachers and followers all over California, and the whole thing is a recruitment front feeding bodies toward the vats. Most of the people worshipping there have absolutely no idea what they're praying to. Their leader is a man called Morpheus, and he knows exactly what he's feeding people into. And he does it anyway, because the Master promised him he'd be spared. That's the horror of the Master, and it's why he still works 30 years later. He looked at the world that had just nuked itself over politics and skin and borders, and he concluded that humanity's fatal flaw was difference. So his solution was to remove it. Everybody gets dipped. Everybody comes out the same. No more races, no more nations, no more war, just one unified species he called the Unity. All of them equally strong and equally immortal, and equally incapable of being told apart. His army rolls across California grabbing people and dropping them into vats, and he genuinely believes he's doing them a favor, and the people he can't convert, he sterilizes so they can't pass on the difference he's trying to erase. He has a category for everyone. Nobody gets to opt out of the Unity, they just get sorted into how they'll serve it. You can even say yes. Reach him, sit through the pitch, and the game lets you agree to be dipped, rolling the credits on a world that quietly becomes his. And then the Vault Dweller walks in and destroys him with a piece of paper. This is my favorite thing in the entire franchise, and I need you to appreciate how brutal it is. Deep in a Brotherhood of Steel archive, there's an autopsy report written by a scribe named Vree, who cut open a dead super mutant and wrote down what she found. They're sterile, all of them. The FEV wrecks their ability to reproduce, permanently, and without exception. You can carry that report into the cathedral, hand it to the Master, and watch a god read his own obituary, and you don't even have to fight him for it, which is the strangest part. Remember, this was 1997, back when beating a game's final boss meant emptying a gun into it until it dropped. Fallout let you end its greatest villain with a conversation, out-arguing a god until he did the job himself. You stand in front of the most powerful creature in the wasteland, a thing that is fused with a building, and you show it a document, because his entire plan collapses on contact with that one fact. A species that can't breed doesn't get a future. It just gets a countdown. His Unity would rule the wasteland for exactly 1 generation, and then quietly go extinct. To get there, he'd have to convert or kill every fertile human alive, which means his perfect world ends with the last super mutant standing alone in an empty wasteland with nobody left to make more. He didn't know. He'd been so busy building the future that he never checked whether it could survive him, and when he finally understands, he doesn't argue. He asks to be left alone, and then he destroys himself and his cathedral. The place was built over a hidden vault with a nuclear bomb sitting in its heart, and when he goes, the whole thing comes down. Followers and evidence and all. His final act is to take every trace of the Unity with him, which is either pure despair or one last tidy cleanup, depending on how much credit you feel like giving him. That's the smartest villain in Fallout, undone by the one experiment he never bothered to run, which was checking whether his new species could make another generation. That's what happened to the first mutant, and it's the answer to the question I planted earlier. Nobody's been breeding them, because nobody can. Every single super mutant walking around out there is a person who was taken and converted, and the vats have been running for 2 centuries because somebody keeps refilling them, and the strain that came after his was so much worse that it barely produced people at all. They stopped being people. You just watch the smartest villain in Fallout kill himself the second he understood what he'd built. So here's what he actually left behind. The East Coast mutants are the Unity's idea run in a dirtier lab, out of Vault 87, with a worse strain and worse material, and the difference shows immediately. These ones can barely hold a sentence together, and the rare smart one is a fluke instead of the plan. They can't breed, so they recruit, which out here means dragging living people back to the vats, and it's why every settlement learns to shoot anything green on sight and ask questions never. But the raiding parties aren't the real endpoint of this condition. What happens to a mutant that never stops growing is a behemoth is 20 feet tall, wide as a bus, swinging a shopping cart welded onto a fire hydrant as a club, and there's nothing left inside. No speech, no reasoning, not even the crude cunning of a normal mutant, just a body that kept expanding until whatever used to think in there got squeezed out. Swan is the one that stays with me, a behemoth asleep at the bottom of a pond in the middle of Boston Common, in a public park, under a swan boat he wears on his back like a shell. People picnic near that water every day and never find out what's under it, and here's the detail that finishes me off. Swan has a name. Somebody once knew that thing well enough to call it Swan, which means before the vats, before the growing, it was a man other people talked to. The master wanted to erase every difference between people until they were all one unstoppable thing. Swan is what that dream looks like when you actually let it finish. A nameless giant in a pond, with just enough of a name left to remind you it used to be sold to someone, but there's a strain that did something crueler because it left the mind fully intact and then broke it from the inside. The Nightkin. The Nightkin were the master's elite, his best work, and they destroyed themselves with a gadget from a store shelf. They started as the finest soldiers in the Unity, the ones sent in first, and they were given stealth boys. Wrist-mounted devices that bend light around you and make you effectively invisible. Perfect for an assassin. Perfect for the kind of war the master was fighting. The Nightkin used them constantly, for years, and the stealth boys turned their skin blue and their minds inside out. Nobody warned them, because nobody knew. The stealth boy was a piece of consumer-grade pre-war tech that the military never designed for permanent, daily, decades-long use, and the Nightkin used it like a uniform. Prolonged use produced full schizophrenia, permanent and untreatable, and it did it to all of them. So now imagine the strongest, most durable killers in the wasteland. All of them hearing voices, all of them unable to bear being seen. They hide. That's the thing that gets me about the Nightkin. The most physically dangerous creatures in the Mojave spend their lives invisible because being looked at has become genuinely unbearable to them. And the device that made them unbearable to look at is the same one that made them impossible to see. Davison, one of their leaders, takes his orders from a Brahmin skull. He calls it Antler. He's not joking. He genuinely believes it's in charge. Tabitha runs a settlement on Black Mountain and broadcasts a radio show across the Mojave. And the show is a conversation between Tabitha and her co-host Rhonda. Rhonda is a Mr. Handy robot who broke down years ago and never got fixed. Tabitha does both voices. She has been doing both voices for a very long time, and she has no idea. And her broadcasts are, weirdly, one of the most beloved things in New Vegas. This furious blue giant ranting about dum-dums on the radio while her dead robot best friend agrees with everything she says. And then there's Lily, and Lily is the one I can't shake. Before the war ended her, Lily Bowen lived in Vault 17 17 with her husband and her 2 grandchildren, Becky and Jimmy. She was 75 years old. She was a grandmother. That was the whole of her life. Then the Master's army broke into her vault, dragged her out of it, and she saw the sun for the first time in her life on the day she was thrown into a vat. She came out the other side a nightkin, an assassin, and a spy in an army sent to conquer California, which is not a job you retire from. And 200 years later, you find her tending bighorners in a mountain town, still calling you dearie, still talking to you like a grandmother talks to a kid who's tracking mud through her kitchen. She hears a voice she calls Leo, and Leo wants to hurt people, and Lily takes medication to keep him quiet. Here's the choice the game gives you, and it's genuinely one of the cruelest things in the franchise. The medicine suppresses Leo. It also suppresses her memories of her grandchildren, so you can tell her to keep taking it, and stay safe, and stay sane, and slowly lose Becky and Jimmy entirely. Or you can tell her to stop, and let her keep the only piece of her life she has left, and become dangerous again. There's no third option. There's no cure. There's just an old woman being asked to choose between her mind and her family, 200 years after somebody made that choice necessary, and the game does not tell you which one is right, because there isn't a right one. Whichever way you go, a woman who used to bake for 2 kids in Vault 17 has to live with it for another 200 years. That's what happened to the Master's best soldiers. They won every fight they were sent into, and then they lost, quietly, one voice at a time, over 2 centuries, to a piece of equipment they were issued. The Dead Money add-on takes it even further with a nightkin called Dog, whose mind splits so cleanly down the middle that the 2 halves have different names and hate each other, and one of them is trying to get the other one killed. Not every mutant broke, though. A few of them looked at what they'd been turned into and decided to build something out of it anyway. The ones who built something. Marcus is a super mutant who became a sheriff, and he's the strongest argument the franchise has ever made that the monster was never the mutation. He came out of the Master's army like all the rest, and when the cathedral fell and the Unity collapsed, he wandered into the wasteland with no orders and no war and no idea what he was supposed to be. What he found was a human called Jacob, and they tried to kill each other, and both of them were too tough to finish the job. So they gave up, sat down, started talking, and ended up founding a town together. Neither of them ever quite explains what changed in that fight, and I think that's the point. They ran out of reasons to keep swinging before they ran out of strength, and the silence that came after was long enough for one of them to say something. That's the entire founding myth of the only successful mixed settlement in the franchise. 2 people got tired. Broken Hills was a mining settlement where humans, ghouls, and super mutants lived side by side, and Marcus was elected its sheriff, and it worked. Think about how strange that sentence is in this franchise. A town where the thing that kidnaps people and drops them in vats is the one wearing the badge and settling disputes about property lines, not perfectly, and not without ugliness underneath it. But it worked, and it lasted, which is more than most human settlements in this franchise manage. There were bodies in the mine, and secrets nobody wanted dug up, and Broken Hills was never the paradise a poster would sell you. It was just a place where 3 species that all had excellent reasons to kill each other decided, most days, not to. Then he did it again. By the time of New Vegas, Marcus has founded Jacobstown, a refuge up on Mount Charleston specifically for the ones nobody else wants, the low-intelligence mutants and the schizophrenic nightkin. He brought in a doctor named Henry and put him to work searching for a cure for the Stealth Boy damage, and he takes care of Lily, and he does all of it while being completely aware that his species has no future. Not all of them thank him for it either. Keen, who leads the nightkin at Jacobstown, is openly contemptuous of the whole arrangement and thinks his kind should take what they want by force, rather than sit in a mountain waiting on a human doctor. Marcus knows they're sterile. He's known for 100 years. He talks about it plainly, if you ask, without self-pity, the way somebody talks about a diagnosis they made peace with a long time ago. He's building a home for a people who are, by definition, the last of themselves, and he does it anyway, which might be the most human thing anyone does in Fallout. And Marcus isn't the only one who came out the far side of this with his mind intact. The one who stays with me is Fox, the intelligent mutant from Vault 87. He kept his reason while everyone around him lost theirs, and his own people locked him in a cell for decades because of it. Because a mutant who can still think is more frightening to them than one who can't. Sit with that. The punishment for staying a person was solitary confinement, handed down by the monsters he refused to become. There are others scattered out there. A mutant selling junk in Appalachia. Another one who just wanders and refuses to fight. All of them doing the same quiet thing, living out an endless life, alone in a category that has no children in it, being useful to a world that would mostly rather shoot them. And then there's the one who didn't stay. One mutant out of every mutant ever ever made, found the door out, the one who got out. There is exactly one super mutant in the entire history of Fallout who turned back into a human being, and he did it to himself, twice. His name is Brian Virgil, and before any of this, he was a scientist working for the Institute, the shadowy group of technocrats hiding under Boston. His actual job at the Institute was running their FEV program. The Institute was cooking their own strain of the virus, and the way you test a virus is on people, so Virgil spent years kidnapping Commonwealth residents and putting them into tanks to see what came out. The mutants tearing apart the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 are, to a significant degree, his professional output. He kept records. The Institute's terminals still have them, subject by subject, each one a person who got dragged down there and never came back up. And then he broke. The guilt got to him, and the man who had been feeding people into the vats went into his own lab and destroyed it, smashing the equipment and burning the research, an event the Institute files under the wonderfully bloodless heading of Incident 5. Then he ran, and he ran to the only place they wouldn't follow him. The glowing sea is the crater at the heart of the Commonwealth, the ground zero of the bomb that ended Boston, and the radiation there kills unprotected humans in minutes. So Virgil injected himself with a custom strain of FEV so he could survive it. Read that again. He turned himself into the exact thing he spent his career manufacturing on purpose as an escape plan. He becomes an 8-foot super mutant hiding in a cave in a radioactive wasteland. And it works, and the Institute never finds him. But it's still FEV, and FEV doesn't care what your reasons were. His own logs record the thing he's most afraid of, which is that he's starting to lose his memory, and his sanity is going with it. He's watching himself turn into one of them, slowly, in a cave, alone, with nobody to talk to about it. That's the punishment, and it's a better one than anything the games could have written for him. The man who ran the mutant factory has to sit in a hole in the ground and feel his own mind going on exactly the schedule he spent years documenting in other people. So he builds a cure. The serum sits in the sealed FEV lab back in the Institute, the place he blew up on his way out, and it's tailored to his specific DNA, and it's the only one that has ever existed or ever will. Get it to him. Wait 3 days, and Brian Virgil is a human being again. He even grows his hair back, which is a detail so small and so ridiculous that it makes the whole thing land. You can also, if you want, talk him into killing himself instead, and take his rifle off the body. The game lets you do it, and the rifle does extra damage, against super mutants, and I think about that design choice more than I'd like to. It happened exactly once, for exactly one man, with a serum that only ever worked on him. And the reason it worked at all is that Virgil, unlike literally every other mutant in this franchise, went into that vat knowing exactly what he was doing and kept a sample of himself. Everyone else was ambushed or dragged out of a vault or fell in by accident. They didn't get to plan an exit because they never knew they were walking through the door. Lily didn't get a sample of her DNA. Neither did Marcus or Fox or the man who became Swan. The only mutant who escaped the condition is the one who was holding the clipboard on the way in. There's a bleak justice in that, and also no justice at all, depending on how you feel about the man. Now remember Strong, sitting in his cage at the top of Trinity Tower. If you cure Virgil while Strong is following you around, he hates it. He's genuinely offended. The dumbest mutant in the Commonwealth looks at the only one who ever escaped this condition, and calls him a coward for leaving. So what happened to every mutant in Fallout? They're still out there, and that's the whole answer. They can't die of old age, they can't have children, and they can't undo what was done to them, so they just continue, in caves and towers and swamps and mountain towns, for as long as the wasteland lets them. If you want to know how ghoulification works, the other thing all that radiation does to a human body, click the video on screen now.